Good afternoon and welcome to the third strategic webinar of the year for the EUROCONTROL Stakeholder Forum. I'm Philip Hughes and I'm Head of Stakeholder Support here at EUROCONTROL. And today I have the pleasure of moderating this webinar on the topic of air traffic controller mobility. So today we're going to be exploring the following question. Can improving controller mobility help enhance European ATM system efficiency by reducing capacity costs and staffing delays? Now, as you've seen in the introductory video, and some of you may have read in our recent Think paper, in 2022, ATC capacity and staffing delays in Europe amounted to just under 8 million minutes of en route delays, costing airlines about 800 million euros in total costs. So in this webinar, we look at how air traffic control mobility might help improve capacity and reduce high level of costs incurred while helping European air navigation service providers meet the traffic levels of 2019, which we expect to be back in around the 2025 timeline. And if you look out longer, you'll see that it's about a 44% increase projected out to 2050. So the challenges are coming at us very rapidly, and I think we also have probably been a little bit surprised about how rapidly traffic has come back post-COVID. So ATCO mobility includes both a situation where a controller moves from one centre to another, and also where ATCOs take control of airspace outside their usual area in order to help other control centres that are stretched or have a lack of capacity. In both situations, there's significant challenges to overcome for this to happen, but in the case of remote operations, there are also real success stories, virtual centres and cross-border operations. On the regulatory side, we already have the European ATC license with a common rating system and rules to mandate mutual recognition. However, national requirements still present difficulties. So to discuss this topic and help us build up a clearer picture of the current situation, challenges and opportunities, we've lined up some top players representing ANSPs and the ATCO community. So I'm delighted to introduce you to Mark Baumgartner, STASAR and EASA coordinator at IFATCA, Aurelia Lewis, CEO of FinTraffic Air Navigation Services, and Austin Hallahan, who's Managing Director at Entry Point North Ireland. So each panelist will make a short presentation just to share their initial thoughts on the topic. And then I'll open the floor to a Q&A session for which we've already received a large number of questions. So you can use the Q&A function to send in your questions. And if you're experiencing any difficulty, please use the chat function on the system. So without any further ado, I'd like to give the floor to our first speaker, to Mark. Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much, Philip, and good afternoon to everybody. So I'll be asking, I would like to start with two slides to show you why, at least from an IFATCA point of view, we think it is a difficult topic to have mobility as one of the solutions to the delay costs. And we have started a short survey among our members in Europe. And I would just like to show you what are some of the results, the questions we have asked currently on the staffing situation in Europe. So maybe, Claire, you can click on the link and click on Romania. So what we have actually asked to all the member association of IFATCA, how does the staff situation look like currently? Do you use overtime actually occasionally, or is that a normal thing? So how are the staff planning done over the next 5 to 10 years? Also maybe the support function additionally to the operational work, and so on and so forth. That has given us, for the time being, replies from 28 countries. What we can say actually, and you can, Claire, maybe close all this and move to the next slide. Thank you very much. So what the main challenge is that we have not enough staff, that mobility becomes a real helper, if you wish, for certain capacity shortages. If you look at this slide, which has been established by EUROCONTROL, and then also the interpretation of this is by the former chair of the PRU, the head of the PRU, Xavier Paul. So basically what we have cost of delays of 800 million euros. We miss approximately in 7% of the cases. So if you want to say that differently, in 62 sectors out of the 580 odd sectors, we miss a capacity which costs us 800 million euros. That corresponds approximately to 700 to 800 air traffic controllers. In order to train an air traffic controller, you can go up to maximum 600,000 euros, one can say. So you can make your own calculation what you need to invest to actually come to a level where the delay costs are not as penalizing anymore for the customers, for the airlines. So that's basically the start, which prevents that mobility is a tool where you could, in a way or another, flexibly reduce delays on a short notice. However, mobility is not something new. We have seen mobility all over the world. We have some of the biggest private air navigation service providers who work only with foreign staff, so who are maintaining systems with foreign staff which have been trained elsewhere and then move. Mobility counts approximately for 5 to 10% of the overall staffing situation. So it's nothing new as such. The issues, what you might have is that it is very difficult to have a harmonized syllabus, not just the basic syllabus for training, but then when it comes to the operations, because we tend to have a lot of prototype tools, a lot of prototype technology, a lot also of local and standard operation procedures, which actually cause quite some challenges. If you would like to have a rapid reaction task force, like it has been suggested in the past as well, of controllers you can drop in a center and then they could be ready for the summer. So that is not possible. Just to give you an example from the center I'm working at, actually, and you see that in the background, just to do a different kind of endorsement, same airspace, same technology, and so on, for regulatory requirements, but also for training requirements. I need to do 35 days of on-the-job training. It takes me 3 to 6 months to qualify in the same sector, in the same zone, different endorsements, lower or upper airspace, up to 6 months to do that. So that's one of the biggest challenges. And in concluding, you mentioned, Philip, as well, cross-border operation. This as well is nothing new as such. So we see that in Maastricht, we see that also in other areas like EUROCONTROL currently doing some of the Kosovo territories and so on. So these are things which we are aware, but there you need always 7 or 9 air traffic controllers to run one of the sectors. One of the things is, what we think is mobility should not be prevented. So if somebody wants to become mobile as an air traffic controller, it should not actually be blocked. But then you have 2 or 3 elements you take into account. One is who trains the initial air traffic controller. So who invents initially the costs. And we haven't seen, for example, like in hockey, farm teams, which will help the NHL teams to get their players, so that the training and the investment is done in a farm team of the same NHL club. So we don't see that for the timing. So it means that somebody who invests into training will then see the person leaving. The other thing you need to take into account as well is seniority in other sectors, banking, insurance, or also pharma industry. If you haven't been abroad, your career will not go on. Whereas in air traffic control, if you go abroad, your career at the initial place stops. And you cannot actually count on this as being rewarded if you are a mobile person who after a couple of years elsewhere, you would like to come back to your initial air traffic control service provider. That's about what I wanted to say as an introduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, Rainey, over to you.
Thank you, Philip, and good afternoon, everyone. And even if we are today discussing more or less about ATCO mobility, I would like to remind everyone that this, as we all know, that air traffic management capacity shortage in Europe is a major challenge, and but it is not caused only by ATCO shortage. There are other elements also, like a technical system constraints, airspace structures, and airspace reservations, which are causing some delays and capacity shortage in Europe. But and there have been lots of efforts, as we know, that to improve technical systems and better coordinate airspace use. But as already mentioned, and like Mark very good pointed out, that ATCO shortage at the moment is a significant challenge for us. So as a conclusion, I would like to say that to modernize the whole European ATM system, it is crucial to address both human and organizational and technical aspects all together. So from ANSP side, and I would like to tell you a little bit about what is one of the reasons why we are facing all the time the ATCO shortage, and basically it is because of inaccurate long-term traffic forecasts, which may fail due to changes to traffic patterns or airline strategies. And recently we have seen a war in Europe, which has significantly changed traffic flows inside Europe. And when I'm thinking about me as a CEO in the FinTraffic ANS, and we are making our budget and resource planning in the future, we need to follow those stat for traffic forecasts, and then we calculate how many ATCOs we need for the sectors, so that we are able to provide capacity what is expected from us. And as we all know that it takes a long time to train new air traffic controllers, and if those traffic forecasts, for example, they are 20% higher than expected, and it is sure that there are too few ATCOs to take care of that traffic if you have 20% more traffic than you have been expecting. And this is basically because ANSPs are bound by performance regulation, which requires cost efficiency and prevents us or ANSPs from maintaining additional resources on a payroll. And that includes, in my mind, also training additional ATCOs to create a buffer of capacity. And this is one of the biggest challenges for us. So that's why we think that there need to be a new ways of thinking that could help address this challenge. And one such initiative is to consider a better use of operational staff, including ATCOs. So while physical ATCO mobility has been proposed in the past, now ANSP and the cancer community is looking into virtual ATCO mobility, which involves virtualization of airspace to transfer data where it can be utilized. And this way, I think that the traffic services can be provided remotely if additional operational resources are needed. In Europe, there are few examples like Finest between Finland and Estonia, and I can shortly tell a little bit more about Finest also. But anyhow, to enable this new way of operation, we need to foster interoperability and an open system ATM architecture, and there has to be new kind of information management, automated technology. We have to have a more digitalization and database services and connectivity in order to provide improved and safe services and improves productivity and preparing for future growth. And also this includes, I think that there's also artificial intelligence is coming, machine learning, and they will form in the future, they will form a critical part of the ATM system in the future. So that is not all. We need, of course, resources, and we need new systems and data and everything like that. But we also need new regulation that support decentralized management of airspace across borders. And of course, there are lots of challenges included in this kind of concepts like liability issues, security, regulatory, political, and financial aspects. But I think that we can tackle those issues also. So basically what we would like to see that the regulations for ATCO licensing and trading should aim for flexible operations, not limited to small number of sector groups. So perhaps the system-based ratings could be the answer for the future challenges. And of course, we realize that not only the new regulation can solve the staff problem. So ANSPs need to collaborate very closely with states and member states and owners and NSAs to accept the new concept of this ATCO virtual mobility. So basically, the ATCO virtual mobility is the ability for the ATCO to manage any airspace independently from their geographical location within certain defined parameters. And it involves providing the ATCO with the necessary information to manage the airspace. So you of course have to have all the capabilities and information necessary so that you can provide services in a safe manner. If you are not in a same geographical location where normally you have used to be, but like I mentioned that this physical ATCO mobility is still possible, and it should they use if it's feasible still. So, but it is not mandatory anymore. And I still remember that some 10 to 15 years ago there was a lot of discussion that how in Europe we should have perhaps 5 big centers where all the en route services are provided. But it is not. At least not in my mind anymore, and there are many reasons. So that like I mentioned, Finest project and together with our Estonian colleagues, Estonian air navigation service provider, we have created this Finest concept, and it is a kind of first virtual center providing dynamic cross-border en route services in Finland and Estonia, and perhaps one of the first kind of attempt in a whole Europe, but this is one perhaps solution, and it is not easy, but it is kind of initiative what we have found that would be suitable for our purposes.
Thank you, Rene. Very good. So, Austin, from a trading perspective, what's your initial views?
Thank you, Philip, and good afternoon, everyone. Having listened to both Mark there and Rene as well, my background is in ATC for many years, and then into training. So ATCO mobility has always been a topic for discussion across many sectors, many night duties, many areas again. And it's interesting at this present time at the moment, we have ATCO mobility training ongoing in EPNI here, where we've had a group of ex-colleagues who went to the Middle East many years ago, who have returned to work back in at the Irish Aviation Authority, NSP, at the moment. So that is happening. So as Mark mentioned, mobility, ATCO mobility is ongoing, okay, but probably not at the pace that we would like it to fill the vacancies that are there at the moment. based on the forecast going ahead. So based on the numbers that we see, there is no doubt, I would say, there is a potential crisis awaiting us very soon if the continuing increase in traffic is happening ahead of the forecast after what COVID did to us at this time. So how do we fix this? How do we recruit? How do we train? How do we fill the sectors in this area? So there was no doubt there was a limit to the physical mobility in this area, because that has to do with people's personal choices and moving across the different countries. But we certainly will have to look at a version of virtual mobility in that area, and that has to be, as Rainey mentioned there in his example. Okay, this has to be really, I think, trialed at this stage to get us over a stage where we have availability of ATCOs trained and competent to fill the area. Because otherwise, these delays are going to increase and costs are going to increase, and this impacts all the aviation system, all of us across the spectrum. It's not enough for us to say we're okay. This impacts all of us. So we have the, as I said, the direct entry training going on at the moment to ATCOs who came back from competent, skilled, were initially trained at the IAA many years ago, and we had to look at this. Okay, how soon can we get these back onto the operational environment from an eyesight? So you got to look at their competency, check an assessment of previous competency undertaken, and a gap analysis to see, okay, what level of training do they require. This has to take place hand in hand with the regulator as well in this area. So this is an example of how quickly can you get these people on site. Can we reduce the duration of the transition pre-OJT, or maybe the OJT itself in this area? So these are areas that you need to look at, and I think we should always look at it, start at a national level, and in time we can move on to the regional level across Europe. So this is ongoing in our side at the moment to get these as quickly as we can on the operation. And it's an interesting, because it's a domino effect. The Irish Aviation Authority require these so they in turn can release instructors back so they can continue the training for the new student controllers, which are coming in the door at this time as well. So it's just a revolving circle in this area. This is important as out as at another level when we speak about the virtual mobility again. Okay, there are no doubt there are challenges in this area here, and Mark outlined some of them. We have to look at national security, the cyber security area, the whole, the system alignment in this area. So these are challenges which take place. And the other one out there, which is very, very relevant, is the regulation. Okay, and just on the regulation, I feel the regulation hasn't moved at the pace at which the traffic in the ATM system is moving forward at the moment. The ATM technology is moving very, very quick now, which was quite slow before. But I know like the introduction of the coupons, Top Sky ATC system is being prepared, developed, trialed and tested, and will be in operation, I would say, in maybe next 6 or 7 years again. Highly dynamic situation. And this is not European, this is a global system, to note it. So how do we address the challenges to overcome the virtual mobility? These are the areas I think which are very relevant for discussion and should be around the table, including training organizations, ANSPs, and ANSAs, and say, right, we need to sit down and come work this out together, because it's not enough to say this is a regulation, you have to be compliant with it. If the regulation is hindering virtual mobility or mobility of ATCOs, then really we should examine this in a lot more detail and say, these are causing unnecessary delays. Rainey, you mentioned it there in your point as well. How do we, whereas like sometimes we can be handcuffed, and it's not a fault of anybody, and it's not here to point fingers, it's just a system. It's the system that's there in place. So do we need to expedite certain areas that, and an example there I can see at the moment, my inbox has many CVs for Ukrainian ATCOs. ICAO versus EU 340. What do we do here? These are ATCOs in the European airspace, ACCs, not unlike our own ACCs in many areas, probably competencies in line with this area. Okay, and these CVs are sitting in my inbox. What can I do in this area? So like these are ATCOs which are out there which could potentially fill vacancies in this. If we did a gap analysis, maybe determine the required training and fill the gap in this area. So that's just a very relevant example which is there in front of us, and I see it coming up in the chat there as well from Ukraine, mentioned there as well. So these are the areas for discussion. I think it's so important today that we've had this webinar to highlight the areas that we need to take it to a step further. But Mark and I were members of the ASO steering committee there in relation to looking at the regulation and harmonization going forward, training and many other areas as well. The initiative has been very successful in this area from that side. Now we're moving on to look at, surely because of harmonization of generic system training across system training to that area. So that harmonization across operations should be looked at. For example, I'll give you a very quick example. all ANSPs do continuation training, probably Q1, maybe Q4. It can't differ that much. Surely there can be an alignment of training plans across Europe someplace. This can be done somewhat online, which we discovered during COVID, that online training is quite beneficial and has been successful. Why can't this be aligned at some stage? Now you're probably releasing instructors to do continuation training. Part of this could possibly be done online with the topics are quite similar, I've no doubt, across the board. There may be some areas which need to be trained for particular airspaces. So these are areas which could be addressed quite easily, I think, without any major hassle. It's just a matter of sitting around the table, getting the heads together and say, right, when are you planning it? When are we planning it? Let's cooperate in this area here. That's my point, Philip.
Okay, thanks, Austin. We covered a lot of ground there, and I think what kind of strikes me is there is rigidity in the system. I think, as Mark said in his in the survey, in terms of capacity. So Mark, just in terms of clarification, what's IFATCA's view in terms of the number of controllers which need to be recruited in order to make that gap? Am I correct in saying you're at 700 to 800?
Well, the figures, they don't come from IFATCA. The figures come from the PRU. It's one part of the PRC reports, PRR reports. So basically, that these are figures which are just looking at the areas where you have capacity issues in Europe, because as I mentioned before, you have maybe 60 or 70 sectors which are the real issue. However, if you want to make the transformation we just heard into a more virtualized, digitalized environment, you need to have people who are able from the ops room to assist the engineering, the research department, and so on and so forth. What Austin also mentioned, you need to be able to extract some of the operation controller to train the new controller or the cross entries. So ideally, and that is something from the IFATCA point of view, you are on the safe side if you are slightly overstaffed, meaning 10 to 15%, because then you don't need either to penalize the development stream versus the upstream or vice versa. So this is really something where we have seen now also in the recent year, and I think Rainy mentioned that as well. In the recent year, there was a very big focus on cost efficiencies, a big focus to reduce OPEX, and maybe also to reduce in CapEx. And if we want to get it right, you see a once-off investment of 50 to 200 million versus a yearly 800 million delay cost is maybe worthwhile to think through. But for that, you need also, from a regulatory point of view, reference period 3 coming to an end, reference period 4 being planned, that you accept that for a couple of years, you will not include, for example, the training of a new controller into the OPEX targets, in order that you leave the air to the air traffic control organizations to breathe, fill in the spaces missing, and also to help develop with operational expertise the new systems you need, the digitalization, the digitalized environment which we need all to start to produce. So that would be a little bit the answer to your question.
Sure. Okay. So Rainy, in terms of the ANSP perspective on that, I think what Mark is saying seems to reflect your views as well. In other words, that we've gone too far with the cost efficiency bit. But is there not also an argument, and some of it's come up on the chat here, that really that for the COVID period was a lost opportunity for training more ATCOs during that period? Should we not have anticipated this rebound and prepared for it?
Yeah, I think that like I mentioned in my opening speech, I think that the one of the reason why we are always suffering, or we don't have enough ATCOs in a whole Europe area, is that basically we have those performance targets what we should follow, and we have to reach those targets. Every states have to reach those targets, and when it comes to the cost efficiency, it is always the question if we have more control as a resource in our payroll than is really needed, And the question is that is European Commission accepting our performance plans? And on the other hand, by the end of the day, we are providing services for airspace users. Are airspace users willing to pay for that extra resources what we could have on our payroll? On the other hand, I think that what we have done in Finland, even if it's have been a COVID time and the traffic numbers were very low, we have continue training new ATCOs, and we have every year we have a basic course for new ATCOs, and of course we can't always provide them work instantly when they are ready and they have their licenses, but we have not faced any problems with when it comes to the resources. If there is a need, those people who have perhaps been unemployed or actually they have not been without work, they have worked in perhaps in some other aviation field, perhaps for airports or for airlines and different carriers. And when we are able to open positions for new ATCOs, they are still willing to apply those jobs. So my answer would be so that we always should continue provide basic ATCO training for new air traffic controllers, even if it means that they have to wait 1, 2, or 3 years before we can take them on the payroll.
So that complements Mark's point where he feels we should have a buffer in the system to allow us to train, to take controllers or to take experienced controllers out of ops, so we can continuously maintain that high standard, I presume, in terms of doing that. So we should always have a buffer. So you feel that the targets, for instance, the way in which the regulatory piece is structured should actually factor that in to make sure we have because you've got the volatility in terms of traffic, and therefore you should recognize that there needs to be a certain level which has to be there all the time. And that's Terene.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, good stuff. So going over to you, Austin, then, just about the you talked a little bit about the training enablers and the whole EU 340 versus ICAO. So there's been a lot of debate about the training enablers as such. So talk to me a little bit about the difficulty in trying to convert trainers. So if, I don't know, there must be, I've seen figures that there's 500 or 600 Ukrainian air traffic controllers, for instance, which seems to be quite similar to what we're saying is the controller shortage at the moment. What should we be doing as a European industry to try and facilitate that process? Who needs to be brought around the table in order to sort it out?
Okay, Philip, just in relation to that and the Ukrainian situation, we had one female ATCO who had previously worked in the Irish Aviation Authority, who was Ukrainian, and we were able to recruit, IA were able to recruit her, and her training is beginning very shortly. She had previously had a 805, I think 2011 license, so that was convertible back to 340. But her colleagues, and as I said, the CVs are there for everyone to read. And I apologize to those if I haven't got a chance to reply to them. I will in that area. This is it. I think they should look at this situation. Okay. And is there a possibility that a dispensation can be made in this certain area to say, right, can we look at this particular area? This is the European airspace, as I mentioned previously. System, probably not unlike other systems. All ATC systems are quite similar. They have different names, but the tools are quite similar in this area. Okay, their volumes of traffic are similar as well. We need to look at it. A gap analysis needs to be conducted in this area. What are the requirements there that we could really use them and train them up and fill in vacancies that are area. So I would ask EASA to sit around the table with it and say, like, is there an area you can make this particular dispensation within a period of time, and it can be reviewed again. If it works, it works, and if not, okay, you need to look at maybe other alternatives as we've spoken about previously. But maybe there is, and this is not to open floodgates in any certain of it, but it's to say like these are very similar in our own. While there's I can't see any major difference. I spoke to the female Ukrainian controller and I asked, okay, what would you compare your ACC similar to, maybe, for example, the Shannon and Route ACC that I had previously worked in? And she said it's very similar, volume of traffic, not unlike conflict areas. That area, it's not unlike that area. I think there's 5 ACCs across Ukraine. Correct me if I'm wrong in this area. So with that number, it's a major, as we've discovered, it's a large country with a lot of airspace in that area. So again, this is an area we should certainly investigate in this area. Like, and I'm even thinking, let's recruit them. Let's find a role that can release other controllers. If initially begins in a flight data situation, they have the ATC background, they have the knowledge. Okay, we may need to look at a language area of training if required. But let's investigate it. Let's rather than letting them sit there. Let's do something. I would say in this area,
Okay,
that's what I said.
So, Mark, coming back to you, you made a very interesting point about ATCO mobility. And it's always something that struck me as strange as well. In most other industries like banking or accountancy or medicine, you're encouraged to go abroad to develop. Whereas if I'm an ATCO, it seems to be, something that you could potentially be penalized for, and that you would lose your seniority, for instance, and so on. What do you think we need to do in order to make that mobility piece more attractive, so that people would physically move, as indeed they would in other industries?
Well, again, I think you could turn the question in different ways, but I'm coming back to the 10 to 15% above the optimum, let's say, operational optimum of the numbers. If you are just right, and the next summer is coming, so you have everything planned and you're just right, and then suddenly you lose a group of 5 controllers who have decided to go elsewhere because of working conditions, because of family conditions, because of whatever the reasons are. So you're suddenly understaffed. So you feel that, at least in the past, that was seen as, we have trained them, we have invested in them, and then suddenly they leave us. So some sort of form of a betrayal. And because you are suddenly understaffed, you can actually explain your emotional reaction to that and say, they have betrayed me. As an ANSP, I've invested in them. And in the very beginning, in the 90s, we had in Switzerland a lot of Danish controllers arriving. And the Ministry of Denmark complained in one of the Minister of Transport meeting, the Matze meeting, and said, it's not right that we are training the Danish controllers and they leave for Switzerland, and all the Swiss get all the benefits of our investment. So it's not a new story in that sense. If you have maybe a little bit overstaffed, then you can say, okay, if these people can go somewhere else and help, and it doesn't hurt me, and it is something like, I think I'm turning more to Rainer without having warned him to that, but I think that's a topic for Council. That is this, if this mobility is something the Council members want to embrace, that they treat it also the same way. But also keep in mind, it's not everywhere as easy as that, even with a European license, to get hired, because you still have national educational barriers which make the mobility quite difficult. And then also sometimes the regime, the commercialization of the air navigation service provider, the different kind of air traffic service provider, makes it sometimes over, simply institutionally speaking, a bit difficult and challenging to force to such sort of an agreement, a welcoming, or a standard, as you mentioned, in the pharma industry or in the banking industry, where this is normal, where everybody says, oh, yeah, where are you going? Yeah. So. So
Rainer, just taking Mark's point then, should ANSPs not be encouraging greater mobility for their staff? Would it not actually be great for them culturally to see how things are done in other areas and broaden that out, and perhaps institutionalize some kind of transfer arrangement in terms of doing it, as they would indeed in other industries?
Yeah, my experience is that I think that it is very important that we have actually encouraged our Finnish ATCOs to sometimes go to some work to some other places, so that someday I know that most of them would like to come back to Finland, and they can give us a very important new use of how to manage air traffic and lots of new experience. And it is possible to encourage from the ANSP side those ATCOs if they are limited number, so to say, who are leaving from one company to other company. But my experience also comes from the late 90s, when actually quite a lot of our air traffic controllers applied job from the EUROCONTROL, and some of them are still working for EUROCONTROL. And at that time, we had a shortage of ATCOs, so it was a kind of a learning process for us. And during that time, Finavia made a decision that we have to train enough ATCOs on a basic course, so that we will have a kind of resource all the time if there is a sudden leave of ATCOs to some other countries. And at that time, I can honestly say that the main reason why they left the company at that time, I was working at Helsinki-Vantaa approach and tower also at that time, and it was because of the bad working conditions. And perhaps the salary was not good enough comparing to the European other ATCOs. It was the one of the reasons. Later on, we have seen that some of them are interested in just looking for new experience on seeing a new cultures, and some are looking for more demanding workplaces also. So the mobility of air traffic controls may solve the problems of some companies which are suffering from air traffic control shortages, but the challenge is always that the training periods for new qualifications take a relatively long time. And that's why I think that there should be, let's say in our case, if we have 250 air traffic controls in Finland, we should have a resource which is something like 10 to 15%. Like I think that the market, your point was quite similar, and that we should have extra controllers, some 10 to 15% above that 215.
Okay. So just picking up on the point then that René made, Austin, in terms of the training, the conversion period, it strikes me as kind of one of the funny things about Europe is that the difference in procedures, in systems and so on leads to greater conversion issues, leaving aside the national bits and pieces. I mean, for instance, you would do a lot of training for organizations like Coupans, where they have the same software running basically in 6 different centers. What do you think is the way forward to try and reduce the conversion period for doing that, either in a mobility piece or indeed even in virtual centers?
And just on that, Philip, having discussed this internally as well, a work colleague of mine made a suggestion in this area, particularly in the Coupans environment that the Irish Aviation Authority are part of, and we're contracted to do their training in this area. ATCO mobility could be a case of where you could swap ATCOs from one of the Coupans partners, train them up in your own system, and you in turn swap your controllers across the way there, because what you're there now is you're encouraging an awareness and a training and getting an understanding of training. So going forward, you could increase this level as well. So you're not down numbers, but you're swapping back and forth. And my idea in this would be to say, okay, you're sharing ideas and training, you're sharing ideas and knowledge. So you would in turn end up hopefully with a generic, I would look for generic type system training, a module on generic Coupan system, and hopefully that will feed in going forward to Coupan's Top Sky ATC1 system that all the partners, and as I mentioned, that's becoming a global environment. We need to make it more harmonized in this area, make it more generic to training in this area. This will reduce costs for ANSPs and in turn throughout the aviation system. So that idea of the ATCO mobility could be initially, and I would say this initially trial by a swap back and forth. Okay, let's look at that. Now you have areas who people maybe pick Navi or LFE, whatever, Croatia, I don't mind, and people get an opportunity to travel, get an opportunity to see how other NSPs operate, and also they train to have the same system. So, and they've all the same colors. So the training in this area should be, I would aim to reduce the conversion training across the whole area. That's the whole objective. Reducing cost of the duration is reducing the number of times you have instructors down, maybe the time of OJTI. So this is the cost reduction area, and there's an opportunity for this to take place. I think I just need a willingness of the partners to say, yes, let's trial this. And this could open up a lot of avenues for this area. So swapping back, this leads to your virtual side. So eventually, if they were trained on site, they can move to the virtual side. And the areas that were mentioned at the beginning where the opposites can be, okay, continuation training, OJTI and UCE checks, okay? Now the OJTI, okay, probably on site, but your continuation and possibly your UCE, this could be done through a system. Yeah, there's no reason why the system couldn't accommodate this, and I would hope the system going forward would accommodate this to make it more virtual. COVID proved that necessity is a mother of invention, okay? We started online virtual training quite successfully. There was no reason why we cannot find the right platforms to use virtual training to accommodate and to facilitate virtual centres as well going forward. And with that, we will have to sit down with the NSAs as well and say, right, how can you help us in this area based on what the regulation is there, or what changes do we need to make to facilitate these changes? That's my thought on that.
Okay. So Mark, in your presentation, you touched on the impact of tools, new tools such as artificial intelligence and other tools for air traffic controllers. How do you think that will change the nature of the job? And do you think it will make controllers more productive, or what do you see that as being as an impact? Do you think more common tooling and operational procedures is that the way to go?
Well, I think definitely we have to follow some of the airborne part when it comes to standardization and the use of new technology. So as an ATM ground infrastructure, we are still very fragmented. We are still, if I always use the image of the 1G, 2G, the telecommunication network. So we are still at the stage for some of our infrastructure of the 1G, the pre-1G telecommunication issue. So, and that is something we need to harmonize the technology, to standardize it, in order that we then can start to get the benefits of a more standardized way of working. But then it's a cost benefit question. How far do you have to upgrade your system that it can take away some of the local knowledges, letter of agreements, restrictions on flight profile, patterns when it comes to arrival sequences, special procedure because of mountainous areas and things like this. So how far do you want to invest into a system which can replace this craft? So it's this knowledge, this local knowledge, which is currently the most challenging part to make a standardized throughput through the operational unit. And the paper of EUROCONTROL mentions that as well. So we should get a standard target throughput. But yeah, the investment into technology to get that right is so big, and I'm not sure if we want to do that. So basically, one of the challenges we have at IFATCA identified and we're working at is how do we take the best out of the human and the technology with the new technology, because we believe that there is a potential with machine learning and artificial intelligence, like in the past radar was. So the advent of radar brought us huge changes. So we believe that there will be things coming our way we don't even imagine for the time being, but we need to get that right. And here again, I'm coming back to the little buffer you should have in order to get these new systems, this new technology to a higher level of standardization, to a higher level of technological human teaming up. You need to have the humans taken out of the ops, the operators, and helping the engineers and the designer to work together in order that you get them something delivered you can actually use. Because sometimes you get something delivered where you then have to find workaround and you can use it. So that is the main challenge. And once we have that put in place, then we can start to talk, for example, about issues like system license, where we can get a license on a system, on a certain kind of system, and then say, okay, because this system is capable of knowing all the local standards, all the local knowledge you need to acquire during the on-the-job training, we let you work on a different piece of land or country or a sector. So yeah, that's okay. Maybe a little bit the frame around your question.
No, very interesting. So if I go to Austin, that particular one, in terms of training, for instance, one of the things that always strikes me as really strange in Europe is the different periods of time it takes to train controllers, the different systems, all of that kind of thing. And given what Mark is talking about how the standardization of the systems, the tools, the procedures, where should we go? I mean, for instance, we've had conversations about competency-based training, for instance, competency-based training assessments and issues like that in terms of moving to a different model. How does the training model need to evolve in order to get a better and more harmonized system to support what we can see is coming down the line?
From a training perspective in this area, Philip, again, you mentioned the competency-based training and the assessment model, which we use throughout the EPA group in this area, which has been very beneficial, where the student is the focus of the training. As in previous models, it was more or less complete the course, and you have to get there, get to that standard, and you might not make it. So that's been hugely beneficial. So we need to take it a step further again. And you mentioned about duration again, and it never ceases to amaze me about the variances in duration across ANSP's training organisation when it comes to TRA and pre-OJT and how things are done. And it has been the regulation in very well, it has outlined the requirements very clearly for everybody in this area. Again, and within the EUROCONTROL ATT forum, there are discussions ongoing in this, and they're having the surveys. So it's a need to sit down with ANSPs and the training organizations again and say, right, okay, how can we harmonize this to a level and take away the variances of saying, well, our airspace is so complex that you have to spend so many weeks doing this section, so many weeks this, when it's really air traffic control training is based on training on ATC patterns in that area. So my thinking is that if you have the basics and the initial training is harmonized very well within very good standard. Now there are some variances, but it's very quite harmonized. We need to look at how do we get to the operations level again. Can we get agreement someplace along the line? Because ATC doesn't differ that much across Europe. The rules are the same for everybody. It's how do we implement them, and how do we look at what's required from a TRA and pre-OJT, what models are we using, and what duration is reasonable. And I think there is definitely room for maneuver, certainly there, to reduce duration at certain times by a lot of people sitting down saying, what do you do here? What do we do here? Let's talk about it and compare. Yeah. And just that, and I think the key again, and this was mentioned about the system license, this is the future for us really, and because the systems are becoming global as well, let's let the system, the air traffic control has moved to air traffic management, particularly for the en route section. So you're feeding the system in this area, okay? So let's use the system to the benefit of improving the training levels, and not, as I said, training has been slow to evolve despite our best efforts. So we think again back to the drawing board again. Let's look at that and use technology to benefit. Thank you, Philip.
So, Rainey, there's been a couple of questions on the chat here, just in relation to the cross-border operations. So, just in terms of the FINES project, what were the major obstacles to do that? Obviously, there's a history of trust between Estonia and Finland, but I mean, in terms of legal cross-border training, what were the kind of the major things that kind of stood out to you as being, shall we say, the biggest barriers to be overcome?
Yeah, the biggest barriers, I think that because the idea is that you have to have a kind of a one airspace, one common ATM system, one license, harmonized working methods, and we can all do that. But the biggest barrier at the moment is the military data, basically, because we have this integrated ATM system in Finland where we are providing all the navigation services both for militaries and the civilian side, and all the information what we in our ATM system which comes from the military side is on the system. And the problem is that we still need to tackle the issue how we can be sure, or how our military can be sure that if we have a common ATM system together with our Estonian colleagues, how can they be sure that this information is not leaked outside of Estonian air navigation services. So this is the biggest issue. It is kind of sovereignty issue, and we need still work with that one. But despite that, I think that we have solved all the issues already. We are not sure, as you know, that we have Finland and Sweden also. We have applied to be a member of NATO and
NATO, yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully, I'm quite sure that quite soon we will be a member of the NATO.
That'll keep the military happy, so will it? Good.
Yeah, but yeah, they're at least happy, but we are not sure if this will change their attitude towards Estonia. So they are now investigating that, and we just have to wait for that. But I'm still quite confident that we can find ways how to finally implement the finest as a full.
Okay, so I know we're coming close to the end of the webinar. So what I'd like each of you to ask is just to identify the one thing that you would like to see changed, so to see how it would make a difference. So Mark, maybe I'll start with you.
Train more controlling. So I think one of the efforts we need to do before training, we need to attract the people. And I think that's really the challenge we have currently. And there we could really team up all those. So, you know, we had at ATCO, Next Generation Aviation Professionals, we had initiatives with EUROCONTROL. We are now seeing also working group at EUROCONTROL, looking at these things. We really need to take this seriously, that we are not as attractive anymore as before. And we need to go out together and attract candidates and select a few who can work, and then try to create this buffer as a permanent feature, and maybe also reward if you achieve a slight buffer a bit. The reward comes automatically, but maybe also encourage that the navigation service providers do work towards an additional buffer.
That's an interesting point about talent competition. I think that's something that's probably worth a webinar in itself. Rainey, from an ANSP point of view, if I was your
I have already mentioned many times this ATCO virtual mobility, which I think that offers a promising solution to the air traffic management capacity shortage. Of course, we need to train more air traffic controls if there is a shortage of them. But as a conclusion, I would like to see that we should look for open-minded thinking within all parties, which means the member states, NSAs, ANSPs, and also ATCOs, and see how new ways of operations as an open opportunity, not as a threat.
Okay, very good. And last but not least, Austin, what would your one? I mean, your one request be?
I can give one. That's difficult, Philip. Yeah.
You only get one, Austin. That's all.
Only allowed one of mine. Maybe 1.5 now. The pace of technology is moving at such a speed. I don't think our training is moving at the speed it is required as well, and we need to look at possibly reviewing that area. I think there again, I would go back to reviewing our training duration to get ATCOs bums on seats as quick as we can, competently trained and safely trained, but quicker than we need to be. And this goes back to Mark's point to recruitment as well. And I'd even look at a European recruitment to cost there in some stage, because I know a lot of ANSPs are struggling with recruitment. We need to attract people. We need to make it worthwhile, but we need to be realistic as well in our expectations. And it's not only ATCOs, it's engineers as well. I can see across the line as well. So again, review duration of training, review our requirements in that area to make this possible.
Okay.
Sinead.
All right, thanks. Thank you, everybody, for all your input. That was really interesting. The main kind of messages I took out of that was we have to invest in people and systems because the challenges are continuing to grow. I think there's now a recognition that there is actually a competition for talent, which also, I think, in terms of attracting people into the industry, Mark alluded to the EUROCONTROL group that's looking at this. This is something which we need to do. I think we need better engagement with the regulators, both at a European level, but also at a national level, because a number of people on the chat here have highlighted the fact that it's local regulatory issues that are actually a barrier to some of the things which we're trying to do here. So I think that was a really interesting discussion, and what kind of surprised me was the degree of consensus in terms of how we want to go about tackling that. So I think this is a topic which we'd return to probably sometime in the future. So at this point, it only remains for me to say thank you to all of the panelists. That was a really interesting discussion, a very passionate and enthusiastic one. So thanks very much for that. And just at this stage, I just want to say thanks to all the team here who set up the whole system, and for all of you attending here now online. Thank you for all your questions. It was a very useful, and I tried to capture the flavor of some of them as much as possible. So please stay tuned for future webinars on topics of strategic interest, and we will be back again. So looking forward to talking to you soon. Stay safe and talk soon. Cheerio. Thank you. Bye-bye.